Oh, hi there, and welcome to episode number 5 of Mike Check with Mike Shaw, the podcast. I am Mike Shaw, which only makes sense because if it wasn't me, who would it be? All right, it's a happy Monday. Not an oxymoron, not around here. If you're watching on YouTube, you see I've got my Seahawks jersey on, representing. We got the Bears tonight. And joining me on the phone, you can hear the noise there in the background. Andrew Clark is with us. He's the Arizona State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Andrew, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Before we get into the propositions that we'd like to talk about, let me just ask you a little bit about football, if you don't mind.
Love to.
Yeah, well, Arizona finally, we're talking about the Kevin Sumlin era here in Baja, Arizona. And at ASU, everyone's talking about, what's going on with your new coach, Herm Edwards. And Herm jumps out to a 2-0 start with a quality win over Michigan State. And when Herm first got hired, people are making fun of the hire and saying Herm's not going to want to coach college football. He's not going to recruit, blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, everyone's going Kevin Sumlin, and we've got Khalil Tate and the Heisman Trophy. And the script has definitely been flipped. It's been weird.
It has been weird. I'm not sure that Michigan State deserves a quality win status based on their performance last week as well.
Right.
But that aside, look, Kevin Sumlin, clearly has had some success in his career. I think he struggled mightily there at the end with Texas A&M for a number of reasons, and he's not the most disciplined coach in human history. And I think for U of A, they're going to have some growing pains for a while. So he's a great recruiter, but I think Wildcat fans should have some tempered expectations. And love Arizona State, but they're always a wild card, and Herm just keeps playing that up. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I noticed that you went to ASU back in the day, so I thought I'd bring that up because we have that friendly rivalry, from Baja, Arizona, and the capital city. One last thing on this subject, and then we'll move on. But did you see those home uniforms that ASU is wearing against Michigan State? They were the coolest football uniforms I've probably seen in my life.
Yeah, ASU's done a great job with the uniforms for a while, and those are certainly the best I've seen yet.
Yeah, it was very cool. Just black with the gold reflective material that changed color depending on the light. I mean, it was amazing. Hey, Andrew.
Yeah, the way they've blended the state flag in is awesome.
Oh, it's so cool. So, I'm not an ASU fan, but they're trying to win me over, I think, with the Herm and these uniforms. Andrew, are you standing in the wind or something?
I am actually getting out of it as we speak, so hopefully that'll calm it down for you.
All right, no problem, man. We've got, it looks like we're trying to get a storm here in Oro Valley, and we'll see how that goes. All right, let's jump into these propositions because November, always an important time for all of us, and especially election year like this one. And two really important propositions on the ballot that people need to know more about. And I think the one that might be the most confusing for most of us, certainly for me, on where I should land on this, is Prop 126, the service tax ban. I mean, as a conservative guy, I'm thinking, yeah, no new taxes. That sounds really good to me.
Yeah, it does at face value, and certainly the way they've run that campaign, they've tried to simplify it in that way. Here's our take on it: is currently in Arizona, we have an exemption in place against service taxes. So if you go and you get your shirt tailored or you get your hair cut, you're not going to pay the 5.5% sales tax that's in place. But if you manufacture something, if you make the shirt, if you make a watch, you're going to pay 5.5% on that.
If you make a toupee.
So with this, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So this proposition isn't going to change that one way or another. What this proposition would do is take that exemption and put it into the Constitution so that if the state legislature wanted to come back and do something innovative like, say, tax reform, they wouldn't be able to do that without going back to the voters and changing the Constitution of the state again.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the problems with the Arizona Constitution is we get these ballot initiatives that are often, and we'll get into Prop 127 as a prime example, where you'll get outside interest and outside money to pay for a signature campaign and to pay people to get signatures, and then you get something on the ballot that is air quotes, from the people, and then you get outside money to try to get it passed, and a lot of these groups are starting to use Arizona as their launching pad for their national campaigns for change. Is this also an example of that, Prop 126?
Yeah, you see this initiative being run by the Realtors Association, and they've done this in Missouri and several other states. And, there's a strategy there that says, hey, if we can't get the legislature to agree to give us these special tax exemptions, let's go ahead and change the Constitution to do it by either confusing or manipulating the public to believe that treating one business differently than the other is in their best interest, which we obviously disagree with and think is a bad idea. The Constitution should be there to protect the rights of every citizen, not to give special privileges to one section of the economy or the other.
Now, isn't this also a solution looking for a problem? As you pointed out, we don't have these taxes in place now. If you're looking for accountability on someone who wants to propose a tax like this, that's what we have representatives for, and we elect those representatives. And if they propose something we don't like, we can unelect them. Isn't that really the proper process here?
It is, and if somebody's proposing to increase taxes at all, it takes a 2/3 vote of the legislature and a signature of the governor. So there's already a tremendous amount of safeguards in place to prevent tax increases that don't make sense. Putting this into the Constitution is just a little bit excessive, and again, it prohibits what we would consider a lot of common sense reforms that are on the table.
Now, when I see the ad, then it's the voiceover saying, and they're going to do it by taxing you on veterinary services, healthcare, childcare, and every service they could find. These are the kind of scare tactics, I guess, that they feel they have to use to get their will passed on the Arizona citizens.
Yeah, it's if you're in the service industry and you currently enjoy this exemption, certainly you want to scare voters into believing that your special treatment or your exemption at the cost of every other business is something worth protecting. And so, trying to scare people or mislead them is certainly the easiest way to do that.
Now, I've noticed that you're quoted as saying that, this is a problem because, more and more our economy, not just our economy, the national economy, really the world economy, is becoming more and more service oriented. And if you take that tool out of the toolbox for state legislatures, because there may be a time in the future where legislatures may have to consider, and the citizens of Arizona may be on board with some sort of taxes on some sort of services to pay for things like education.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many toupees that we manufacture in the state still. And so as the need for revenue increases over time, even as a smaller percentage of the overall economy, if all you've got is goods left on the table as something that you can tax, goods or income tax or property tax, you're going to have to increase the rate of those taxes. And so when you've already got a very high sales tax and a very high income tax relative to some of the states around us, setting ourselves up for a future in which we have to increase those rates while everyone else is decreasing just makes us less competitive in the economy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I would say that Americans for Prosperity is saying no on Prop 126.
We are emphatically doing that. Yep.
Okay. Emphatically doing it. Well, I think there's one that's even more emphatic, and this goes back to the point I was making earlier about outside interests coming into the state, paying for people to get signatures, getting their thing on the ballot, and then running ads to try and get this thing passed. Prop 127, the Clean Energy Initiative, I'll just be honest, and excuse my French, scares the crap out of me.
It should. I mean, it has the potential to raise your rate. So, California has a similar measure in place, and based on their measure, their utility costs are almost 50% higher than ours. So it is reasonable to expect that if this were to be on the ballot and the people would pass it, that we would see a significant increase in what we're paying for our electricity.
Yeah. So again, what Prop 127 would do would basically mandate that half of our electricity by 2030 comes from what they're calling renewable sources. Now, to them, renewable sources does not include nuclear power, which nuclear power is reliable, it's on all the time, and it emits, wait for it, zero CO2. And so if this passes, would we be able to get enough wind and solar up in time to prevent Palo Verde from having to close a reactor or two or all three?
I think there's a lot of reasonable people that have doubts that we'd be able to keep Palo Verde open, and the fact that reasonable people have doubts should be enough to put a little fear into all of us.
Yeah, so I mean, Palo Verde doesn't just supply a third of Arizona's electricity. I mean, it's also, there are shareholders in surrounding states, including California. Um, California, who passed something like this, is already suffering under this. If they can convince Arizonans to pass something similar, they're going to hurt themselves again.
Yep, no doubt. It's one of the challenges that you have with trying to adopt a utility system based on wind and solar. Is there's just times where the sun doesn't shine, either because we're out there at night or because a cloud comes over. And so you've got to be able to rotate to the next available power source. So for California, that's been coming to us to get it from our nuclear power plants. And if we're joining California in that system, we are hurting California, but we're also hurting ourselves, because you can't just spin up and down a nuclear reactor on a dime. And so what you end up doing is having to build twice as much infrastructure for the same power demands.
Yeah, certainly my stance has been for a long time. I've been pro-nuclear since pro-nuclear was cool, since the 70s, since I was in junior high and did a speech on it. Palo Verde has 2 available sites for 2 more reactors. My solution is let's do that. Let's get more nuclear in here, especially since there's so much pressure to shut down our coal burning plant at the Navajo Nation.
Yeah, and the Navajo generating station is almost certain to close regardless, just because the cost of coal has gone so high. But I think this is more to the point philosophically of where we want to be, is you want an economy that is based off what's the best value for consumers. So whether that value is based on price or quality of life, I think we want to be agnostic to that. And so you want a system where consumers are put in charge and the consumers can choose which product or service they want to buy. And under the proposals for both 126 and 127, they're suggesting that instead of consumers being empowered, the government's empowered, and that the government can decide what products or services consumers should want to buy. And I think on a philosophical level, that's something we all ought to oppose.
Yeah, that's just never the right answer, or almost never the right answer. We're talking with Andrew Clark. He's the Arizona State Director for Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org, and go to the Arizona dropdown. Or is there an Arizona-specific URL, Andrew?
No, if you go to americansforprosperity.org, you'll see we've got, it should automatically default to the state that you're coming in from. And if not, you can click the drop-down menu and select Arizona.
Right. If you're using a VPN, use the drop-down menu.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Then you're really one of our people.
That, no doubt. It's just, I haven't picked one yet, but I'm going there soon. All right. Back to this energy and, President Trump's energy policy. I just love it. It's the all the above energy policy. And President Trump has done a decent job of rolling back EPA regulations. That's still in process. We're not quite all the way there yet. But I think we found out during the Obama administration that if you want to pick winners and losers in energy, the real losers are the consumers, because we should pick the best sources of energy that make sense for your region, for your state, for your country, and let the consumers decide. Because if energy costs go up, who does that hurt the most? People who are poor and on fixed incomes.
Yep. We've got almost 500,000 people in the state of Arizona that are paying between 20 and 30% of their income to cover utility costs. So if utility costs go up by 50%, you can imagine who's being hurt the most by this. And for those people who have to choose between what food they're putting on the table and whether they keep the air conditioning on, that's just not the kind of situation you want to find yourself in.
Yeah, now there's kind of a debate back and forth, and unfortunately I've seen some local reporters on Facebook talking about this, and I guess to their credit they're going to look further into this, but they doubt that 50% increase number, and the opposition is saying, well, that's a number from the utilities, so you can't trust it. We're saying it's going to lower prices, but we know that hasn't happened because of the California example. But can we be certain about an increase, and can we be certain about a 50% increase if 127 passes?
Prices are dynamic in a marketplace, and so the price of natural gas has gone down as fracking has made more resources more available. So, conceivably we could find new sources of natural gas that could drive the price there down and offset the way we view that. Battery life could improve significantly over the next few years, and it could make some of their arguments about lower price more salient. It's hard to say, but, most of the arguments they're making about price today are based on what is the cost to generate a kilowatt of energy. And so the cost for generating solar has come down significantly, and they're projecting that it'll continue to come down, which is great, but that's not the cost to the consumer. Just because you can generate power doesn't mean you can deliver it to them.
Right.
And so, again, if you're trying to deliver power at 1 a.m. when the sun's not shining, you have to factor in the cost of storing the energy that you powered up during the daytime. And that's where the technology does not exist at a cheap enough rate to actually drive down costs. And so, is it conceivably possible they could eventually drive down costs? Sure, but today it's unlikely. And in, California is the best example we've got, and they're 50% higher than the rest of the country. I think that's probably a good indication in the short term of where this would impact us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then having said all that, then the conclusion really isn't it just better to not be constrained by a constitutional amendment that would make us 50% renewables by 2030, an unrealistic goal, and just let market forces play into, if solar was that cheap and that efficient now, then TEP here in Baja, Arizona would be doing more solar instead of just now starting to upgrade, adding more natural gas to their existing plant here in Tucson.
Yeah, there's a serious cognitive dissonance in the arguments that they're making that, hey, these large utilities aren't taking on enough solar because they want to make money, and they make their most money by excluding solar. But if it's really about companies wanting to make money, if solar was actually cheaper as they claim, you can guarantee the utilities would be using it because they want to make more money.
Absolutely right.
These two arguments they're making are in contrast to each other.
Yeah, it does make no sense. I get a little worried that people are going to see the dueling commercials and get a little bit confused, but actually I think Arizona is going to do the right thing here. If Prop 127 passes, I will be scared, very scared for our economy, but I think it's going to fail. But what I love about Americans for Prosperity is you don't take this stuff for granted. You have an army of people who work on the ground and on the phones and make sure that people are informed. And I know you're growing that army all the time. So if someone's listening to this or watching it on YouTube and is going, I really want to make sure Prop 127 doesn't pass, how do they get involved, and what kinds of things would they be doing with you guys?
Yes, you can go to azriggedeconomy.com. That's azriggedeconomy.com, and you'll see on there just some brief explanations on why we vote no on 126 and 127. And you can sign up there to volunteer with us. And if you come in, we will absolutely put you to work trying to talk to other people in Arizona and explain to them why these are harmful, both to kind of the moral fabric of how we ought to operate and also to people's pocketbooks. And so that might include knocking on doors, making phone calls, hopping on social media, sending text messages. We try to take advantage of every medium that there is to get the word out there and help get people informed.
Yeah, and I'll just let people know if they're on the fence. If you get in, sometime, not saying every time, but sometimes if you get involved in maybe a Saturday where you're making phone calls across the state, sometimes there's pizza. Just saying.
If you've met Leslie from our team, there
Yes.
is always food.
That's right.
And it's not just pizza. It's every kind of carb and sugar under the sun.
Right. A little extra incentive. Yeah, I know Leslie White very well. And she's a very hard worker for the cause and for you guys. And, again, Prop 127 really scares me. 126 scares me less, but it still doesn't sound like a good idea. I don't know if Americans Prosperity has a stance on this or not, but the more and more, that I've been talking about this over the years, the more and more I'm concerned about the initiative process that's in the Arizona Constitution. Can we get that out of there somehow? Should we? How can we limit the damage of mob rules by initiative?
Yeah, there's a reason that the founders of the country set up a constitutional republic and not a direct democracy. And there's certainly some downsides to the initiative process. As an organization, we're usually neutral or agnostic to process-related questions. But I've seen a lot of proposals that say things like, hey, we ought to come back and revisit proposals every 10 years to see if they're still relevant. There's proposals to raise the threshold so that instead of a simple majority, maybe we need 55 or 60% of the people to agree on changing the Constitution. I think ideas like that are worth considering because you do have a challenge with a public that has a difficult time understanding very complex issues, and both 126 and 127 are good examples. Trying to understand the intricacies of battery life and technology and how utility systems deliver power is really tough for somebody who doesn't specialize in either policy or in electrical engineering.
Right.
And so, asking them to make decisions that impact millions of other citizens is a very difficult thing to do. And so there are probably reforms that make sense that people can and ought to consider.
Yeah, I like all of that. And the other side of that is, too, people are busy. You might have a soccer mom who has 5 kids that has to be at 6 different practices. It's crazy. A lot of people don't have time to pay close attention to this stuff, like the geeks who listen to this show or, listen to talk radio in general.
Yeah, selfishly, I would hope that people are out creating value for others in their chosen line of work and not sitting around thinking about various government policies all day.
Right.
I think it's better when people are doing more productive things with their time.
I like it. And that, like you said, that's why we have a representative republic to protect the rights of individual citizens, even while we still have elections that have consequences. Andrew Clark, Arizona State Director, Americans for Prosperity. Give that URL again one more time for people who want to get involved.
If you want to go to azriggedeconomy.com, it's azriggedeconomy.com, and it'll show you how to vote no on Prop 126 and 127.
Very good. Andrew, thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, man. Have a good day.
You too.
All right, that was Andrew Clark, again, Arizona State Director, Americans for Prosperity. I love those guys. AmericansForProsperity.com, azriggedeconomy.com. I'm sorry, AmericansForProsperity.org, azriggedeconomy.com if you want to find out more. That is episode 5 of Mike Check with Mike Shaw, the podcast. And just want to, I mentioned YouTube a couple times. I am recording myself on camera while I do this. I'm going to stop recording and I'll upload the audio, of course, and it'll go out to all the various places. But if you go to YouTube and just search for Mike Check with Mike Shaw, that's M-I-K-E Check with Mike Shaw, you can find the YouTube channel as well, and you can subscribe there and watch via YouTube. Or you can just go to mikecheck.us, M-I-K-E check.us, and there's a link to the YouTube channel from there and the other social media that I'm doing as well. And you can always tweet me at Mike Shaw TV, use the hashtag MikeCheckUS. And if we get enough questions in both in YouTube and on Twitter, we can start doing maybe special episodes where we do listener comments and questions as well. That'll be fun as the podcast grows. Again, thank you so much for your time. In episode number 5, episode number 6 tomorrow, we'll be talking with our friends at R Street Institute, and we'll be talking specifically about artificial intelligence, as it relates to legislation, as it relates to regulation. Where is AI going? You might be surprised in all the things that it's already baked into and what the future holds. So it's going to be a really interesting, important conversation that we'll have tomorrow right here at MikeCheck.us, Mike Check with Mike Shaw. I'm rambling now, so I'm just going to say goodbye. We'll see you tomorrow. Go Seahawks. Oh, and may God's love ever be with you.